Engaging your colleagues with humor. Amidst the social distancing, face masks, and never ending string of Zoom calls, it can be hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Staying productive, engaged, and sane while managing the stress of the new normal is not easy at all. But there is the way to put our emotions to work and lighten things up no matter our current work environment. Humor. When you assess, analyze, and act on the situation around you through positivity and play, you can enjoy yourself, avoid chronic stress, and work stops feeling like too much work, even when working from home or even your child is around. Join us as we talk about mindset required to use humor, discover how to find the funny in the world around us, and unlock the magic power of humor. Joining us tonight, we would like to welcome Mr. Andrew. He is the CEO of The Humor That Works, a leadership development company that teaches professionals how to use humor to achieve better results. He has partnered with top organizations include IBM, the UN, and the FBI to solve human challenges with humor solutions. A best-selling author, Andrew has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Inc., and Fast Company, and was named a visionary under 40 by the P&G Alumni Networks. His TEDx talk on the skill of humor has been viewed more than 9 million times. Hello, Mr. Andrew. Welcome you to our education session tonight.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction and for having me this evening. It is morning where I am, but evening where you are, and it is an absolute pleasure to be chatting with you.
Yeah, so do I. Now, Mr. Andrew, the first question for you is how is it important for our corporate professionals to use humor at work?
It's a great question, and it's one that people often ask. They think of humor as kind of something that is nice to have, right? They think of it as a thing where, if I had a little bit of fun at work or if I laughed a little bit more, that would be great. But if I don't have that, I guess that's okay. Or, maybe that's unrealistic to expect it. But the reality is that what gets fun gets done, right? When we can find things that we find enjoyable, or when we can make the things that we have to do a little bit more fun, we are more likely to do it. We're more engaged in our work. And in fact, I can start kind of the framework for today with a very dumb question. And I would love for you to answer this question as well as for those of you watching to answer this question for yourself. And the question is, would you rather do something that is fun or not fun? If you had to pick, which, yeah, right? You're going to pick fun, right? 99.9% of the people that we work with say fun. And so it stands to reason then if you were to make your, say, presentations that you have to give a little bit more fun, would your audience be a little bit more engaged? Or if you were to make your own work a little bit more fun, would you be more willing to do it? Or if you're to make your kind of team dynamics or your culture a little bit more fun, would you see an increase in employee engagement and a deduction in employee stress and employee turnover, et cetera? And the research shows us the answer is yes. There are over 30 benefits to using humor in the workplace, backed by research, case studies, and real world examples. And that's why, as an engineer, I think of humor not as a nice to have, but as a must have. And that's why it's so valuable in today's work environment.
I'm curious, Andrew, because your background is engineering.
Mm-hmm.
How can you come from a background, I understand that it's quite dry and unemotional, to a journey of humor?
It's a great question. So yes, my degree is in computer science and engineering, and people are often surprised. They're like, and now you speak about humor for a living? Like, how does that work? And I will tell you that as an engineer, I have always been obsessed with efficiency ever since I can remember, really since before I can remember, because I was born 3 weeks early. So apparently even in the womb, I was like, I don't need a full 9 months. I'm ready to go right now, right? Obsessed with efficiency. And that works very well for things like projects and for programming, right? So I graduated computer science and engineering, and I started working at Procter & Gamble as an IT project manager. And that obsession with efficiency actually really, really helped. The problem is that while you can be efficient with things like computers, you can't really be efficient with humans, right? Because humans have emotions
Yeah.
and feelings, right? They
Yeah.
get sick and they get tired and they have to
Yeah.
eat and they have to sleep and all of these other things that are so inefficient. And
Mm.
so it turns out to be productive or effective in the workplace, you can't be efficient with people. You have to be effective. And that's where humor comes into play. Humor allows us to be more effective with people. As an engineer, it is one of those tools that helps me to manage the hardest resource I've ever had to manage, which is other people. Now, if you're wondering, okay, how did I personally get into using humor? Then that goes back to university days when I was getting my degree in computer science. My best friend wanted to start an improv comedy group. He needed people and basically forced me to join. It was one of those things. It's university. I was like, okay, I guess I'll try this thing. And we did some improv practices and some improv shows. And I was terrible because I am not one of those naturally funny people. But over time, I started to improve and learn these skills. I learned about things like yes and. I learned about how to better listen as a scene partner. I understood things like comedic structure and started doing a little bit of stand-up comedy. And as I learned this skill of humor, I started to find ways to incorporate it in my day-to-day work and to recognizing like, oh, this actually can help. This is actually making me better at my job, not worse, or it's not serving as a distraction.
I see. And how did you decide to go with humor as a full-time position instead of part-time like you used to do?
Yeah, so it started kind of naturally. Like I started to incorporate humor into my work at Procter and Gamble. So I remember being in this meeting at P&G that was incredibly boring. And I'm sure you've been in one of those very
Yeah.
boring meetings. This was one of those very boring meetings where it was so boring that I like wanted to cry. Like
Oh,
it was
really?
kind of like, yeah, it was just like, I wish I was doing anything else right. I started like daydreaming about the other stuff that I wish I could be doing. And it wasn't even exciting stuff. I was like, you know what? I'd rather be folding laundry right now, I think. Or like I should schedule a root canal just so I feel something again. Right. It was one of those terrible meetings. And the problem is that I was the one leading that meeting. And I had this realization that if I'm bored while talking, the audience has to be bored while listening. And so that's where I started to say, okay, well, maybe I can bring in some of this improv and stand-up stuff that I've been doing. Mostly it started first just to entertain myself. I was like, okay, maybe if I put a picture of me in every single one of my presentations, like I'm a big fan of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Stan Lee, at least at the beginning of the MCU, was in every single film as a little cameo. And I was like, what if I'm in every single one of my presentations? And I would find an excuse to show me a picture of me as a baby, or a picture of me doing something that I loved, or one from school, or whatever it was. And I noticed it started to make me more engaged in my presentations, and my audience started to be more engaged. They started to be on the lookout for the pictures of me, or they wanted to see what story I was going to tell. And I basically kind of fell in love with that. I fell in love with this idea of incorporating humor. And then the next step was I realized that I had learned about the benefits of humor, but then I was going to all of these other meetings and they were still incredibly boring, but I couldn't do anything because I wasn't the one leading them. And I was like, you know what? Someone needs to teach that person how to use humor. Someone needs to tell them so that to make it more engaging, not only for them, but also for me. So it was kind of a selfish thing that I was like, someone needs to teach these other people how to do presentations. And then I realized like, wait, that someone could be me, right? Because I never learned this skill at humor, right? In college. This was not a university class, right? This was not a like, hey, as you go off into the work world, remember, be very good, be prompt, do your work. oh, and have a lot of fun. No one ever really talked about that piece of it. And
Mm.
so I decided to start to be, okay, maybe I can be that voice to teach other people about the benefits of humor and how to do it. And so I started internally at Procter & Gamble at first, just kind of offering up things to my teams or to my extended group. I even proclaimed myself the corporate humorist of P&G. And I'll admit, I kind of thought someone would stop me from doing that. I thought someone would, from like HR or legal would come up to me and be like, hey, you can't just create your own job titles. But instead, no one ever did. Instead, people just started referring to me as the corporate humorist. And so I fell in love with that work. I realized it was a message that was impacting other people. And that's what led me to start Humor That Works, my company, first part-time. And then it continued to resonate with people. People really enjoyed it. And so I decided to make it my full-time thing, to be able to teach other people about the value of humor. And I think perhaps more importantly is that humor is a skill, which means it can be learned. Because I think sometimes people think of it as like, you either have to be funny or you're just like, out of luck. And the reality is that it is something that you can learn.
I see. That is a very interesting journey to bring you from a corporate person to a humorous person right now. I'm interested in one point, Andrew, because since that too many corporate professionals, they understand that corporate world is just like a professional environment. Sometimes it's quite strict and we need to manage our emotion instead of showing too much. So how can we bring humor to the corporate world in an appropriate way so that people can enjoy fun things just like you have been doing? What is the appropriate way to do that?
It's a great question, and there's multiple ways that humor can help. And the way that we think about how to use humor that's appropriate or that's actually going to help in the situation is using something that we call the humor map. Because again, we train on using humor not so that people think, hey, you're a really funny person, you should do stand-up comedy. No, we train humor as this thing to say like, oh, wow, that's really effective. Or I have this problem to solve. How can humor help me to solve it? And the way that we think about that is, like I said, we call the humor map, which stands for your medium, your audience, and your purpose. So your medium is how are you going to execute that humor? Is it, in a virtual presentation that you're going to give? Is it just by yourself as a way to relieve some stress? So it's kind of in your own head. Is it in a one-on-one in-person conversation or is it in an email, right? Because all of these things impact how the message is received. Because I'm sure you've maybe experienced that before where like if you send someone a joke via text or via email, if they don't know that it's a joke, they might be offended by it, right? If you say something sarcastic, they'd be like, why are you so mean to me? And you're like, no, it was just a joke, right? And so the medium impact, right? Exactly. It's happened before. That's why emojis are so helpful because you can say like, no, winky face or smiley face to let people know that you're joking about something. So that's the first part is your medium. Next part is your audience, and that is who is going to receive that humor. Is it just for yourself? Because that's a perfectly valid reason to use humor is not for anyone else, but just for yourself. Or it might be for a good friend that you have in the workplace. Or maybe it's for an entire audience that you've never spoken for before, right? That's something that I do a lot is speak to different companies. And so maybe I haven't met these people before, but how do I make sure my humor is still appropriate and going to resonate with them? And then finally, the last piece is your purpose. And this is the most important is what do you actually want to achieve with that humor? Because it's not just humor for the sake of humor. It's humor to solve a problem. So, for example, one of the easiest places to start with incorporating humor into your own work or your own life is for stress management, right? Because I think a lot of us are dealing with stress, right? The uncertainty of what's going on just across the entire world, constantly changing requirements at work, the difficulties of either working from home or going into the office or whatever it has to be. We're dealing with a lot of stress. And so we can be intentional about using humor to relieve that stress. And that way we can kind of like, if something causes you stress, if you do something that is a little bit challenging, then, okay, how can you make sure you use a little bit of humor or seek out humor, right? You don't always have to be the source of humor. You might say, hey, I'm feeling a little bit stressed out right now, so maybe I should watch a funny video online. Maybe I should go on social media and follow some people that really inspire me, some cartoonists or some people creating videos, or maybe I'll watch a stand-up comedy clip, or I'll listen to a funny podcast, something that you're like, I just need to laugh and release or reduce some of that stress. That's a perfectly valid way to use humor into the workplace. And the nice place about starting there is that no one can stop you from doing that, right? That's not a like, oh, you said something inappropriate to someone else. It's like, no, it's just you and whatever way that you're finding a little bit of humor. So that's just one of many, many strategies that we can use, which we can talk about other ones as well. But that's where it starts, is that medium, audience, and purpose, and starting to identify what is it that you want to achieve with that humor.
I see. That is a very useful sharing, Andrew. The next question I'm curious, that is that in case that we are working in a diverse culture environment in which the people just come from different backgrounds, how can we make sure that we create a humor that the other people can understand and they can laugh with you as well?
Yeah, it's a good question, and that goes to the audience piece of the map. That A is really about doing a little bit of research and understanding your audience. Because I'll admit, I was presenting pre-pandemic. I presented in Malaysia and actually did a stand-up show there, and I did terribly. And it was because I did not understand the audience. I hadn't done my research. It was my first time performing stand-up in kind of particularly that part of the world. And I was like, you know what, the same material that I've done in European countries and some of that same material that I do in the US and et cetera. I was like, that stuff will work too. And I hadn't done my research because I did some material about joking about how I'm a, in some ways, one of those Americans that doesn't understand the metric system, right? Because I grew up just using miles, et cetera. And so I do this entire elaborate bit, and the audience did not really like it at all. They weren't really laughing much. And I kind of thought maybe it was the audience. I was like, maybe it's just a quiet audience. Maybe it's an audience that's just a little bit more reserved. And then the person after me went up, and that person like crushed it. They had the audience laughing hysterically, almost like rolling onto the floor. And in fact, he called back one of my jokes and did it better than I did. Like he made a better joke about the subject matter that I was trying to, and the audience loved it. And this was probably like 5 or 6 years ago. And it was just a good reminder how your humor does have to change for the audience. You do have to, one, adapt it to be culturally relevant to that group. Because I say maybe I have a bunch of great working from home material about how, it's weird during the pandemic, people started to get better at using things like virtual, like, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people would present from down here where they would do what I call the turtle, where it's just like the top half of their face, or they would do the opposite, what I call the Batman, where just bottom half, or, somehow people almost in every single virtual meeting, it seems like someone's going to get stuck on mute. Like they'll get stuck on mute, but then they'll just.
Oh, goodness.
Right. Just a little virtual humor for you, right? But so I have this humor, but.
No, it happened.
I'm just going back and forth between muting, etc. Right? Yeah. Every meeting has that scenario happen where you go back and forth on mute. And I kind of think like talking while on mute is kind of like pushing on a pull door. It's one of those things that we've all done, but it's still a little bit embarrassing when you do. But all that to say is I can do this great humor, but if I'm talking to a group that doesn't do a lot of virtual meetings, then they may not resonate with that material. They may not find it funny. And so it's really about understanding the audience. And the last component to understand around an audience that's really, really important is what your relationship is to them and what their perception of you is. Because if I've known you for years, then I'm going to have a better sense of your sense of humor. I'm going to understand what I can say that's going to make you laugh. But if I've just met you, then what I think is funny might be offensive to you. or insensitive or just, out of bounds. And so you have to learn to understand what is that person's sense of humor. How does it perceived coming from you? And the safest thing to do, I think, is to make your humor positive and inclusive. Make it something where it's less about, oh, I'm going to be very sarcastic or I'm going to be very aggressive, and make it more about, hey, what's positive, what's inclusive. And that, I think, goes a long way. The way that I think about it is I always want my mom to be kind of proud of whatever I've said, whatever joke I've made. And so I do that as a little test for myself to say, okay, before I say this, would my mom be cool with me saying that joke or saying that? And if it's like, yep, then I'll say it. If it's like, I don't know if she'd like that, because she always taught me to be nice and polite, etc. If she's like, I don't think I would say that, then it's like, okay, I'm not going to say that this time, and instead move on.
It means that whenever you make a humor, you may want to analyze your audience first and make sure they resonate with what you are saying.
Yep, exactly. Right. And one of the things that, if we talk about this kind of skill of humor, one of the things that we will do as, say, presenters. So I know some people this is around presentation skills and speaking, etc. One of the things that we'll do as comedians sometimes is have what we call kind of test jokes. And we'll say some type of humor early on in our presentation and see how the audience reacts. And that can tell us if we're going to use more of that humor or less of that humor. So, for example, I love puns. I love wordplay. And so I'll sometimes share a joke early on in the presentation that is a pun. I'll say something like, a man once asked me if I wanted some free fish. And so I asked, what's the catch? And what's the catch is kind of a cliche saying. It's also one that's like, what's the catch? Or like, why, what's kind of the secret? Why is this fish free or whatever? And so that is a joke that if it's an audience that like truly understands American kind of like cliches, etc., they may get that and they may laugh. And so if they laugh, then it's great. I know I can do a few more puns and some more wordplay a little bit later. If the audience groans, that's also okay, right? If they're like it's kind of a fun back and forth, I'll still do some more puns, but I'll go back and forth with the audience a little bit. If the audience is completely silent, then I'll know, okay, maybe that's not this style of humor that they like, right? So you have these different styles of humor. So then I also have stories early on, and I have observations, etc. And as I present, I understand and see, what is the audience reacting to? What are they enjoying? And okay, let me do more of that as the presentation goes on. So it's absolutely about kind of analyzing and taking a look at the audience, both beforehand, doing some research beforehand, and also adapting in the moment.
I see. It means that you're going to have a test to make sure that what is their favorite taste. And then you're going to do more with that kind of taste, right?
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. So you adjust and adapt on the moment. Like any good presenter or speaker, you have to adapt to the audience. You have to know, should you be speaking slower because maybe people aren't quite understanding, or should you be speaking faster, etc. And the same is true for humor, that you want to adapt to the audience.
Okay, I think that let's get to the final question of our live stream tonight, Andrew. That is that can you share with us some techniques or some ways in order to create humor at work?
Certainly. So there's a few different techniques. This is part of that skill of humor and discovering kind of the comedic secrets in some way of humor. So one of those is something called a comic triple. And a comic triple is a list of 3 things where the third thing is unexpected. And so, for example, when I sometimes talk about the organizations that I've worked with, I'll say, I've done work for organizations like IBM, the United Nations, and the International Association of Canine Professionals. And that last one is a little bit unexpected. As soon as you hear that, you're like, wait, what does that even mean? What is the Association of Canine Professionals? Like, is that an organization for dogs who have jobs? And it's like, no, it turns out it's a group of people who train dogs. That's what a canine professional, I guess, is. But right, it's something a little bit different. And what's important to note about that is, one, humor is more broad than comedy. So when we're talking about adding humor to a presentation or adding humor into the work, it's not always going to be hilariously funny. It's not always going to make you laugh out loud, but it might make you smile, or it might make you lean in a little bit more. And that's something that a comic triple can do, where it's this list of 3 things. The third thing is slightly unexpected. You might go, wait a second, what was that? And that gets people paying attention a little bit more. Stories are also a fantastic way to share a little bit of humor, right? Sharing a little bit of a story, adding some humor as you go through, because then we're interested in kind of what happens in the story. And I think to kind of demonstrate that, I'll share a brief story. And also we can use stories to make a point. So one of the things is with humor, when you first start trying it out, you may not be perfect at it. You may have to adjust over time. So for example, I remember one of the first times that I ever did yoga, going to a yoga class when my wife and I were first dating. I had shared with her that I'd like to exercise. And so she's like, oh, we should try to do yoga together. And I didn't want her to know that I had never done yoga before. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. That's cool. It'll be great. We'll go there. And so we go to yoga class and I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I've never been to a yoga class before. I don't know any of the poses. I don't know anything that's going on. It is way harder than I thought it was. I kind of had thought like yoga is just stretching, and I didn't know it was like bending your body in ways that certainly seems unnatural. And so my strategy in the yoga class was to just start to do whatever it is that my wife was doing. I was like, you know what? I don't know the pose name, so I'll just mirror whatever she does. Because the poses, I don't know. I don't think that they seem all that accurate, right? They say child's pose. I think, great, child's pose is just going to be me sitting on the mat crying, right? Is that child's pose? And it's like, no, you have to bend a certain way. Or like cobra pose, I think it's going to be kind of like a cool little dance move, like it's in cobra. No, it's like when you're like stretching your back. So I was like, I don't know any of these things. I'm not guessing correctly as to what they are. So I'm just going to mirror what my wife does. And that works a little bit better. And we do all of the animal poses. We do cat cow and downward facing dog and pigeon pose and cobra pose. And we do all the, different ones. And then finally at the end, we get to Shavasana. I think it's Shavasana. That's the dessert pose, the one where you kind of just lay there at the very end. And we're laying there and we're kind of like, we're centering ourselves, bringing ourselves in. And my wife reaches over and kind of just nicely holds my hand, right? And we start to share this moment together. It was after a long class. And the problem was that I was mirroring and following everything that my wife did. So I reached over and grabbed the hand of the man next to me. And turns out you're not supposed to hold hands with the entire class in yoga, right? And so this is a story, this thing happened to me. So this is a story that I can now tell to an audience and get them, have them laugh or smile or think about, yoga, or this like kind of, hey, we've been in situations like this before. But at the same time, not only are you engaged, but I can also make this point that anytime you try something new, it's not always going to be perfect, right? And humor is just like any other skill. It takes practice and repetition to learn. It's going to take some time and effort to do. And so don't be discouraged if the first time you try it, people don't laugh or you get kind of a slightly confused look. Start first with yourself. And then the last thing that I'll say in terms of getting started is, because humor is a skill and it can be learned, then the question isn't, are you funny? The question is, what kind of funny are you? Or what kind of funny do you want to be? And what we've started to realize is that there are different natural humor styles. There are some people who are out there that are just quote unquote naturally funny. They're the ones that whenever they tell a story, you listen. And maybe they never had any formal training, but there's something about them that you just want to listen to what they say. That's great, right? Yeah, that's perfect. But not everyone is like that. But there are also people who are very good enthusiasts, people who just kind of naturally laugh and can find the humor in every situation. Or there's people who find funny stuff online, and then you can send that to other people and be a curator, right? So there are these different, what we consider 7 primary humor personas. And one of the best ways to get started using humor is to identify your primary or natural style and build from there. So that's what I would encourage people to do. In fact, we have a completely free assessment on our website. If you go to humorthatworks.com/assessment, you can take a free 2-minute assessment and learn what is your natural style. so that you can get started with using something that is natural to you.
Mm, definitely, Andrew. So, in order to contact you further, how can our audience contact you, Andrew?
Sure. So we've got a ton of free resources, including that assessment at humorthatworks.com. You can also, if you have specific questions for me, you can also reach out to me on all social media at Drew Tarvin. So DREWTARV as in Victor IN on all social media. So if, whether it's Instagram or Twitter or LinkedIn, whatever it is, you can contact me there. I'm more than happy to help. But it all does start first with a choice. So I'd encourage you to start thinking about how can you start to incorporate a little bit of humor into your day, and what is your natural humor persona style, so that you can start with something that's a little bit easier.
So start ourselves first, the basic step first. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us tonight. I do appreciate so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for watching our education session. Bye-bye.